So the genocide in Gaza was the dominant context shaping Islamophobia throughout 2024, way into 2025. I would say European governments largely failed to condemn mass civilian casualties or defend international legal principles. Instead, what many states did was not only to side with Israel, as the war between darkness and light, barbarism and civilization, as Benjamin Netanyahu called it. They also criminalized free speech, demonstrations, banned protests, and subjected activists, particularly, but not only Muslims, a lot of Jews as well, to surveillance, intimidation, and prosecution. So if you look at the public debate, for instance, you can see that it did not only become deeply polarized, where Muslim voices frequently were delegitimized or treated through the lens of suspicion. I think a great example is the Amsterdam riots, which really exemplified how misleading certain political narratives and lies coming from the Israeli establishment were amplified by mainstream media and used to conflate basically anti-war solidarity with extremism. And this environment in general, I would say, emboldened not only far-right movements, but really pressured centrist parties to adopt exclusionary, securitized rhetoric targeting Muslim communities. So I would say, especially since the beginning of the global war on terror, concepts of citizenship have become much, much less stable. Citizens of Western countries were detained to Guantanamo Bay. People with dual citizenship were stripped of their Western citizenship because of membership in associations under surveillance, etc., etc. And maybe to give like one of the more starker examples, we have this very famous example where a citizen of a country were killed by drones of their homeland. And all these are examples revealing that the citizenship of racialized identities is not implying any protection similar to those belonging to the dominant society. So first of all, I don't really believe in civilizational talk, but yes, there is a struggle between parts of European societies that stand for a diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, open society, and other parts that want to nurture what I would call a white nationalist Europe. And this white nationalist Europe can either be religiously charged, as in the case of Christian nationalism, but it can also be very secular as part of what I would call the Enlightenment fundamentalists. And the first group is very well organized, and I would say they are the common people against large parts of the organized establishment. So I think first we have witnessed in many countries the criminalization of speech and symbols, banning rallies, for instance, which all were in a way means of intimidation to silence the protest against first the aggressive war and then the genocide against Gazans. And this also translated into the academic sphere. We've seen many scholars being disinvited, awards being not given, people not allowed to enter European countries. And in a nutshell, what happened was that we saw the criminalization of those people who would dare to speak truth to power. And oftentimes these measures taken by the police or the justice system later on were overruled and considered as being not lawful. But still, with these legal victories that are important, what is much more important is that the nation states continue using these measures to intimidate activists, briefly stop them, and for sure retard their activities, demonstrating basically who has the upper hand here. Islamophobia is both an institutional practice, as we can see in countries that have accelerated the degree of the institutionalization of Islamophobia, such as Austria and France. And it is also a societal relationship defining who is in and who is out. So who can be part of a society, draw on the resources to the same degree as those who are considered to be sort of a natural part of that society. And I think what is important to consider here, that especially in Europe, the notion of whiteness is very key, as there is an idea that the native population in one way or another has some sort of privilege over immigrated non-whites. And this idea is mobilized by many political parties, but not only the far right. The right is doing it maybe in the most disgusting way, but many so-called centrist parties are not fundamentally different. So I think what is important to see is that the dehumanization of Palestinian lives is interlinked with the dehumanization of Muslim lives. So Palestinians are largely read in the European public as Muslim, even though you have a strong Christian population, obviously. But the media framing, basically to say that this was an attack by Hamas rather than by several Palestinian resistance groups, including those not grounded in the religion of Islam, made it appear as if this was an attack by a religious group. And so this conflation of the Palestinian and the Muslims makes it basically possible to translate the perception of so many deaths as worthless into the dispensability of Muslim life. In other words, what we could witness was that the European public became normalized in accepting the deaths of 10,000s of people who were killed during the genocide in Palestine, which was translated into the worthlessness of the lives of the people who have a Muslim background in Europe. So, as we've seen in the so-called Abu Dhabi secrets, as revealed by many investigative journalists throughout Europe and the United States, the UAE had paid tens of millions to the Swiss private detective firm Alp Services that basically designed a smear campaign all over Europe to discredit Muslims and their allies in Europe who stand for an open society. So for the United Arab Emirates, it's largely the idea, I think, to legitimize its own domestic crackdown on Muslim opposition in the Western Hemisphere. And Austria is just one example amongst many where they had tried to sell this to cheap politicians. And even though they were not absolutely successful, they still pretended to be. Now, I have come across several readings to explain this. One argument is that the Emirati leadership has a deep hostility towards Islam as a religion itself. And I have to be honest, it's a little bit hard for me to swallow this argument. The other is that it is about going after internal Muslim opposition, which makes much more sense, as the monarchy is interested in defending its power, and if it feels threatened by Islamic movements, then it goes after them. And the third one is that it has become so tightly intertwined with Israel that even if it wanted, it is unable to get out of that relationship. And I think what we really have to keep in mind here is that even when supporting Islamophobia, this always allows for some kind of good Muslim, a domesticated Muslim, to exist in the midst of an unjust regime, be it in Israel itself or in the UAE or anywhere else. So it's always those Muslims who defend the status quo, who profit from it, and who don't stand up against injustice, that are always accepted in the midst of any kind of power structure. So Islamophobia here in this context, I think, does not necessarily mean to be against anything that is nominally speaking Muslim, but it is really about a political stance towards injustice. This is what it comes down to.